So again, thanks everybody for coming. This is going to be our lecture series. This is a joint venture between the Sauk Conservation Alliance and also the Badger History Group. So tonight we're going to be talking about prescribed fire for conservation. And with us tonight is Karina. I forgot the last name. Cardella, and she's been at the Nature Conservancy for 6 years. She's part of the fire management program there. So she's going to talk to us about that, and she's going to go into a lot more bio about her stuff. But thanks for coming tonight, and have a great show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karina Cardella, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about the use of prescribed fire for conservation. I'm going to be using our Spring Green Preserve as a case study to go into a little bit more details. There we go. Oh, it's going to go forward now like 6 times. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and why I'm here. I am the assistant land manager with the Nature Conservancy Wisconsin chapter, but I'm also a prescribed fire practitioner with the Nature Conservancy's North America Fire Program. So I split my time about 85% in Wisconsin and 15% traveling the country. We supplement the U.S. Forest Service offices. We help them with prescribed fire. We help them prep their burn breaks, do fuels management, burn brush piles. A lot of the work that their staff can't do because they're out fighting wildfires, they come send us in their place. There's about 80 of us. Some of us are embedded in chapters such as myself, but then there's others that are hired on, and that's what they do full time. It's a really great program. I've gotten to travel the country to burn. I most recently was setting fire to some longleaf pine savanna in Florida, which is very similar to our oak savannas here. Like Bill mentioned, I have been with the Nature Conservancy for 6 years. 5 of those years I've been doing fire. My education is from Indiana University-Bloomington. I have a Master's of Science in Environmental Science and Applied Ecology, as well as a Master's of Public Affairs and Natural Resource Management. And it's actually quite funny. My focus in graduate school was wetland science and limnology, the study of lakes and water bodies. So I think it's quite funny that my career kind of flipped, and now I do a lot of work in fire. I love the overlap where I get to burn wetlands. That's really where I nerd out the most. But I'm a Wisconsin native, and I grew up exploring the kettle moraine state forest in southeastern Wisconsin. So those oak savannas and the kettle moraine topography really has a special place in my heart. So I'm just going to give a quick overview about what the Nature Conservancy is and our goals before I get into talking a little bit about fire as a land management tool in Spring Green. So the mission of the Nature Conservancy is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. Our work is grounded in science. It's non-confrontational. It includes a variety of partners and engages in local communities. I personally find that those last 2 bullets are the most important in the work that we get done. I find it absolutely astounding how much more work we can get done when we're working with partners. As you guys know, buckthorn does not see boundaries. A lot of land management, a lot of nature, the arbitrary boundaries we make do not matter. So it's really important to form partnerships both with those that are geographically close to you and also organizations that align with your values to really get that work done. This photo here, I had to include one photo that isn't a fire dependent community. This is one of my favorite preserves up in Door County. Most of the preserves we have in that area are wetlands, but this is the one tiny bit of the Niagara escarpment that we protect. And it's absolutely beautiful, but we're not here to talk about Door County. We're here to talk about some fire. But first, I am going to talk a little bit about the Nature Conservancy by the numbers and a lot of the work that we do. The Nature Conservancy is a global organization. We have a presence in 50 states and 35 countries. There's over 3,000 staff and 1,400 preserves. And so because of that, you know, we have a huge footprint, and there's definitely strengths and challenges with that. Overall, across the globe, we protect about 119 million acres and counting. We have some really aggressive goals to protect even more by 2030. Wisconsin itself, we were established in 1959. Originally, our program was led by volunteers for the first 17 years. So volunteers really are the bread and butter of how we get this work done. We currently have roughly 46 employees and 5 offices, 20,000 members across the state, which I thank you so much to our members because they help fund the work that I do. And then 230,000 acres protected across the state. With that caveat, we only own around 30,000 acres outright, which are scattered amongst these preserves across the state. The other 200,000 acres that we protect are through conservation easements where someone else owns the land and we help protect it. We also help with transfers. So we will acquire land for the DNR and then help them manage it and transfer it to their ownership, as well as also doing watershed scale and watershed scale conservation. So some of the places we work, this is a nice little map. In the middle here, it's Central Sands. This map is old. We actually just started working in the Central Sands again. And that's my main project area, actually. I work in the sand plains of Wisconsin, not so much the Driftless area, but I get to burn all over. And since the focus of these talks are in the Driftless, I wanted to talk about one of our preserves in the Driftless area. But as I mentioned, our preserves in Door County, they're absolutely wonderful wetlands, some of the most pristine estuaries that feed into Lake Michigan. We also have our Mugwanago River watershed preserves, which are what I grew up exploring. And then as you move into the Driftless, we've got the Baraboo Hills, which everybody knows so much about. They're so important in this community. It makes me so happy to see how many people really appreciate and love those preserves. And then up in the Northwoods, we also have some really, really special places. Our Tenderfoot Preserve is about 500 acres of old growth hemlock forest. It's absolutely special. The only access you have is via boat, so you have to kayak in or paddle in. It's pretty amazing. But we're going to talk about Spring Green Preserve a little bit today. So Spring Green Preserve, you can see here the city town of Spring Green, right along the Wisconsin River Valley. These maps are actually a little bit old. We now own the parcel that we own is pretty much contiguous on both sides of the highway. Right smack dab in the Driftless area. You know, I'm not a geologist, but I do think that the geology that shaped this landscape, in particular Spring Green, really is fascinating, because you can see this river valley compared to the other ones is so much wider. And that's because the glacial dam of Glacial Lake Wisconsin, when it broke, it just, you know, so much water was getting sent and all of this sand was being deposited. And that really did shape the plant communities and ecosystems that we have today. And on top of it, it carved these incredible bluffs, of which we get to do a lot of wonderful conservation work. So a little bit more about our Spring Green Preserve. This is it in all of its glory in the summertime. Really, photos don't do it justice, just how steep those bluffs are. But it was a joint management program between multiple entities. Again, I cannot stress enough just how important partnerships are in getting this wonderful conservation work done. The first parcel of land was acquired in 1971, and it is known as Wisconsin's desert because there is a lot of interesting plant communities and animals that you don't necessarily associate with Wisconsin, which is usually more humid and moist. And another really interesting thing that I think is like a historical token is that it was named by settlers in the late 1800s because of the way the south-facing hills turned green in early spring. And I think that's really important to think about as we move through how the management progressed of this preserve throughout its ownership with TNC. So really quickly, I'm going to talk about some of the plant communities that we have at Spring Green. We have Sand Prairie, which is a dry native grassland community. It does overlap a little bit with oak barrens, but really when you think of a prairie with like maybe one or two trees here and there, that's more or less what we're talking about. Sand prairie historically occurs on broad sand terraces that border large rivers. So like Mississippi River, Wisconsin River, Black, Chippewa rivers. And it's really interesting too, because a lot of natural communities that we have in Wisconsin, they've shrunk because of habitat fragmentation, but sand prairie actually is more prevalent now because of failed attempts to farm. And a lot of that land that went fallow went back to prairie. Granted, it's not, you know, the historical high quality prairies that we have, remnant prairie, it's a little bit more degraded, but if its proximity to higher quality prairie really expands the habitat, and a lot of birds and other organisms, they need more space rather than high quality and diversity. So that's really great to see. We also have dry bluff prairie, which is really what you think about when you think of that big bluff at Spring Green. It occurs on steep south or west facing slopes. And that's the key there. The slopes have to be south or west facing because you get a lot of heat from the sun that keeps things really dry. And it can also be at the summit of river bluffs with sandstone or dolomite bedrock near the surface. And usually it's shorter to medium-sized prairie grasses. And this plant community is pretty uncommon in North America, but it's quite abundant in Wisconsin, and particularly in the Midwest. due to the unique topography and the north-south orientation of the river valleys, which I'll talk a little bit more about shortly here. So the Black Oak Barrens are a really, really interesting ecosystem. There is a little bit of overlap with the sand prairie. If you think about it, like oak barrens have a lot of big trees and then a lot of grasses and forbs underneath. So you're kind of taking a prairie and you're throwing in some trees. There's kind of two, Black Oak Barrens kind of grow on a spectrum. So you can have like the big park-like trees with a lot of flowers and grasses underneath, but you can also have scrubby oak sprouts. It just depends on the intensity and frequency of fire that you're seeing in that area. So it's a very varied canopy cover. Anywhere from 5 to 60% canopy cover can be considered barrens. So you can see one area where you're like, this is a prairie, but it's like, nope, it's a barrens. And other places where you're like, this is a forest. And they're like, nope, it's still a barrens. So it kind of is a very amorphous plant community. It definitely occurs on sandy soils, outwash plains, lake plains, and broad sandy terraces like that of the Wisconsin River and the town of Spring Green. Less than 0.0% of all oak barrens nationwide remain. So it truly is an imperiled plant community. I think one thing that gets overlooked when we talk about endangered plants and animals is we're thinking of that one species. And the DNR has plant communities such as these listed as whether they're threatened or endangered or plant communities of concern. So we can look at those in the same way as those individuals. And when it comes to restoration, like we can try everything we can to protect that one butterfly. But in reality, that butterfly is probably endangered because the plant community is also endangered. So if we're working to protect that plant community, the odds are very high that we're going to also be protecting those endangered species such as plants and animals as well. So like I said, due to changes in land use, all of these communities, which once covered thousands of acres across the state, are almost completely gone or highly imperiled. So I thought this was a really nice visual. I snagged it from the DNR website, just of where these plant communities occur. So sand prairie, it's kind of more or less what you think of when you think of a prairie, just super sandy soil. That dry bluff prairie, that's kind of the bread and butter of those driftless slopes, in my opinion. And when you look at the presence and you think of a map of the driftless area, I think that overlaps very, very nicely. And then those Black Oak Barrens, the key there is that sandy soil. So if you look in the middle of the state, that's the Central Sands region where it's flat. That was the historical lake bottom of Glacial Lake, Wisconsin. And then it curves and it goes down through the Wisconsin River Valley. So it's just really cool to see how these ecosystems are shaped by the geologic history of Wisconsin. So I would be remiss if I don't talk about some of the plants and animals that you get to see at Spring Green. Rich Henderson did a survey in 1991 and found 376 plant species, 320 of which were native. 2 of them were state endangered and 2 are state threatened or of special concern. And I do think now since then there are a few more endangered or special concern, but I was unable to locate formal records of that. But this is the classic Spring Green vista. You've got rough blazing star, you've got some big blue stem and some goldenrod blooming there in this photo. And also the classic Spring Green, if you have not visited, there is prickly pear native to the state of Wisconsin. And it is all over the place in Spring Green. I unfortunately still have not seen the prickly pear bloom, but I actually took this photo on the right here just after a burn. This was on Tuesday. And it's wild because you don't see that prickly pear. You see grass up to your chest and then you burn it and you're like, oh my gosh, there's really a lot of cactus in here. And then also another plant that really is special, I've not seen it anywhere else, is waxy milkweed. And up in the corner are 2 of our staff members absolutely ogling over it. And they know every plant under the sun and they were very, very excited. So I thought I'd throw that in there. And this photo as well is Hoary Pacoon. And I think this is a really, really great photo. I was not here for the burn. This photo was taken in 1998, but I can tell that this site had been burned earlier this spring. Hoary Pacoon usually blooms sometime around May, early June. And the fact that there is no thatch or dead grasses, and you can see that rich, vibrant soil and the sand poking through and just the green that's coming up is just incredibly vibrant. That's how you can really tell that this had been burned just a few weeks before. And then a few more plants. We've got some pampas plant with the bluffs in the background, and then some spiderwort and more hoary cocoon. I also want to chat a little bit about the birds of spring green because this is a grassland community. There are so many wonderful grassland birds. The eastern meadowlark in particular for me is very special. On burn days like this time of year, I can just close my eyes and I can hear the eastern meadowlark, and that's when I know I'm either at our military ridge preserves that are prairie and they're also in the driftless, or I'm burning in spring green. However, a lot of grassland birds, due to habitat fragmentation and loss of habitat, their breeding and wintering grounds are on the decline. A lot of these birds winter down in South America, so we can't do that much in Wisconsin to protect that, but it is really important that we protect their breeding grounds here in the United States. It's also very cool because the Nature Conservancy is a global organization. We do a lot of work in Colombia, and we communicate directly with the Columbia chapter in Wisconsin. So we have records of birds and the work that we're doing to protect them both down there in South America as well as in Wisconsin. And it's really cool to be able to connect those puzzle pieces globally. Some reptiles. All of these photos were taken back in the 90s, but they were taken on this preserve. So I really wanted to include them, which again, like you don't necessarily think of Wisconsin and crazy reptiles, but the warm, sunny, south-facing slopes really make it like Wisconsin's desert. And then a couple other critters that I thought were cool. Pocket gophers, they really do a lot with mixing the nutrients up in the soil. And then tiger beetles, there's only 16 species in Wisconsin and 10 of them are found at the Spring Green Preserve. And threats to a lot of these organisms include habitat loss, fragmentation, woody encroachment and brush, invasive species, as well as climate change. So in terms of the woody encroachment and brush, I'm going to talk a little bit about cedar at the moment. Eastern red cedar trees, they are native, but normally they're limited to the rock outcroppings. You'll see these a lot in Door County, even out west a lot when there's a lot of steep slopes and rocks because the fire can't reach up there. So when you take fire off that landscape, you really see a lot of encroachment of cedars. It's kind of hard to see how quickly cedars can creep in. This is particularly an issue in the sandhills in Nebraska, in Missouri, in Oklahoma, where they were brought in to be planted as windbreaks, and now they're completely taking over these prairie ecosystems. So this photo was taken in 1981. This was just 10 years after the first parcel was acquired. So this is all eastern red cedar climbing up the side of the bluff here. And we know historically that this was not here just by the anecdotal evidence that the town was named Spring Green because of the green hillsides. And yes, this is green, but it's not the green that they were talking about. And they did a lot of work. This was a few years later and they cleared all of those trees. We've got some aerial images as well that were taken. So you can really see, I swear, pictures really do not do just the sheer topography justice of these areas, but you can see a before and after of what the cedar removal process looked like. Some really great photos that I found of them hauling out cedar logs. I can tell you right now, I've done some fuels reduction similar to this, and we don't get to use horses. I wish we did. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but cedar trees are not fire adapted. So they're a great way to mitigate the encroachment of cedar. And then I'm also just going to touch on some other land management things that we do, just because I want to stress that fire is a tool in our toolbox. It is not the only tool we use. It's really important to use other things as well in order to have well-rounded management. So black oak barrens, they're very sandy. And there is a history of some scrubby oak, but sometimes it can become a little bit too overgrown. So some mechanical removal will be done, as well as herbicide to control invasive species. So in this photo here, all those yellowish green leaves, that's all black locust, which is not native. Some other invasives that are treated out there are dame's rocket, spotted knapweed, sweet clover. A lot of those forbs will pull mostly, especially these days because of the hard work that's been done for the 40 years on this preserve prior to my management. There's really not a lot. So we can go in and pull them in a couple of days and come back next year and check on it. I also want to say too that foliar spraying is not the best technique for this. A lot of these would be sprayed with basil bark on the bottom, just because foliar spray has a lot of risk of overspray. And because this is such an imperiled community that is so sensitive, we try not to do spraying like that. As well as because this is a prairie, a lot of prairie seed collection and planting occurs. I really love the juxtaposition of the top photo from 1998 and then the photo to the right that I took in 2021, because over 30 years, we're still spreading seed on these prairies. And you can see in the background there that we had recently burned that unit, and that's where I was going, was to throw some seed since all the thatch was gone and those seeds can have direct contact with the soil. The photo at the bottom, I was looking at some of our archives, and those plugs, those prairie planting plugs, actually were raised at the UW Arboretum. So again, partnerships, so important to get any of this work done. And then the photo on the left, actually, I threw that in there. We were pulling invasives there, but you can kind of see where there's wood chips. This had recently been masticated to get rid of some of those woodies. And in the foreground, you can see a lot of really, the forbs. There are a lot of those forbs that come up right after disturbance. They're not necessarily the high quality rare ones we're looking for, but it's still good to see forbs coming up once we took all that canopy cover down. So why use fire? There's so many great reasons. I think a lot of you here know some of these, but it invigorates and stimulates native plant growth. It helps maintain a heterogeneous habitat, which I will talk a little bit more about how that happens and why it's so important. It stimulates soil productivity and nutrient cycling. I mean, just look at this photo. I took this about 3 days after a burn. And some of you may know this is roundleaf hepatica. It's not necessarily a prairie species. This was right on the top of the bluff where the forest meets the prairie. But it's just really great to see all the nutrients in the soil and these flowers blooming just days after all of that thatch was removed. It also helps reduce wildfire risk, and it can help control invasive species and brush, which is a huge concern dealing with that cedar. So I really liked this quote from the DNR. Prescribed fire is the intentional application of fire to a specific pre-planned area under specific environmental conditions to accomplish planned land management objectives. Without the use of prescribed burning as a management tool, Wisconsin could lose many of its native grassland, wetland, and savanna plant communities, in addition to the oak barrens that we were discussing and the dry bluff prairies. So this is a super, super high overview of the history of fire in Wisconsin. This is truly bird's eye view. You can really get into the weeds with this. But I just wanted to touch on it a little bit because it really helps emphasize why using fire is so important. So before European settlement, at least half of Wisconsin burned on a regular basis, which is truly a huge proportion looking at how much we're able to burn right now, which is really not a lot. This was either intentionally set by Native Americans or was naturally occurring wildfires. Because these fires occurred so frequently, a lot of Wisconsin's plant communities grew to adapt to this over tens of thousands of or hundreds of thousands of years. These plants changed because fire was there. They learned how to adapt to fire, and then they became to the point where they needed it. Without fire, a lot of these plants and plant communities would not exist anymore. But fire has been largely suppressed or removed from the landscape for at least 150, pushing more like 200 years now. And a lot of the endangered plant communities and plants, they rely on this type of disturbance. So if we don't have fire, a lot of these things are going to go away. So a couple of specifics as to how plants are adapted to fire. Oak trees in particular, they love fire. They have thick, thick bark, so that like hot fire is not going to harm the cambium. They're going to do really well even without fire. There's a lot of other trees that do not fare so well. They are not adapted for this. Prairie grasses in particular, they really burrow their roots super, super deep, like 10, 15 feet down. Their buds are under the soil, so they can they can withstand that heat and fire. A lot of plants have fire activated seeds or serotinous pine cones, so they literally cannot germinate without the extreme heat of fire. And again, a lot of times species like oaks and forbs, they're stimulated by that fire. They're going to grow more vivaciously once fire is on the landscape. So the Tallgrass Prairie and Oak Savanna Fire Consortium came out with a really cool model looking at where Wisconsin needs fire the most. And and specifically ecosystems with a fire return interval of 50 years. So red means that these landscapes, they need fire. They need it frequently, and they haven't seen it in a long time. And that's a huge chunk of the driftless area. As well as up in the Northwest, that's the Northwest Sands landscape. So there's some barrens up there as well, a lot of sand prairie. Those ecosystems used to see fire a lot, and we have very little fire there. And as a consequence, we have these ecosystems that rely on it are highly, highly imperiled. So when are we going to burn? I am specifically talking about the Spring Green Preserve. Fire windows can vary depending on so many things. They can vary on your objectives, what types of plants you're looking for. So I'm going to be like looking at this more through the lens of Spring Green. For us in particular, because these are sandy soils, the last rain event can, like, if you're burning in Baraboo and it rains, you're going to need a few days to dry out. That's not necessarily the case in these sandy soils. However, we do rely very heavily on the snowpack and the freshly melting of snow in order to burn. So as you can see here, I took this photo, I'm like halfway up the bluff. And because we have snow, we can just send 2 people up and they can light it and walk away. There's not too much in terms of holding concerns. Some other things that you need to think about when burning, which those of you who know a thing or two about fire, like this is going to be, you know, textbook, you're thinking about this every day this time of year. Wind direction, temperature, cloud cover, relative humidity, those are all very important things to think about, and things that kind of can give you a no or a go for whether you're going to burn that day. And also they can have, if you say it's a go, but the humidity is high, it might affect how things are going to look. So when we burn at Spring Green, we kind of have a variety of temporal phases of what we're looking at trying to burn. So in late March or late February to early March, we're going to try and just burn off the bluffs. So that dry bluff prairie. Mid-March to early April, that's when we're going to try and burn the flat prairie and oak barrens. And then late April to early May, we're going to get those north-facing forests, which I haven't even touched on yet. So I'll talk a little bit more about those later. And then I also had to mention that we do burn brush piles in the winter when there is snow. So late February to early March, this is when we're looking for a fresh snowfall. February to March, winter's almost over. The sun has got a lot more radiant heat, and it's going to melt off those south-facing slopes because they get a lot more heat from the sun, and they get a lot more time during the day where the sun is exposed to, or the sun is, melting those bluff faces. We're looking for the sweet spot where the snow has melted off the bluff, but it's still wet, or there's snow all the way around these units. So these are the 5 bluffs that we burn on the Spring Green Preserve. And because we have the snow, we really don't have as many holding concerns because we know it's going to go out right when it hits that. I also think that this the bottom photo of bluffs 1, 2, and 3 is really telling. Directly south of bluff 2 is an agricultural field and a sand mine, and directly south of bluff 3 is our oak barrens and sand prairie mix. So it's just really interesting to see what would have been there before, you know, human disturbance, and what we're hoping it looked like historically. So how are we doing this? The bluffs are very steep. And while we do have snow, sometimes if we know it's going to be windy the next day, we want to make sure that anything out there that could be risky, and especially highly visible, like you can see very far, like when you're on the highway down in Spring Green, you can see up to those bluffs. So we don't want to leave smoke that's going to alarm people. I also really love this photo on top of the fact that it finally shows just how steep these bluffs are. You can see the cedar stumps from 30 years ago when somebody had to hike up there with a chainsaw and cut them down. I am forever grateful for the TNC staff and volunteers that came before me so that I did not have to hike up there with a chainsaw and cut them down. But it's really, really important that we burn these bluffs off this time of year, because it allows us to burn the prairie, the flat prairie and the oak barrens more easily later on in the spring. If we're not able to hit that perfect sweet spot where there's no longer snow on the bluff, but there's still snow or it's super wet everywhere else, then it does make things a little bit more logistically complicated. And I'm going to talk about that because that happened to us this year. Another thing I want to talk about is the variability in fire intensity. The bluffs do not burn the same time or the same way every year. Those of you in here that do prescribed fire, you know that you'll burn one unit and it's going to go off like gangbusters. And then the next year, you know, maybe it was a little cold, not as windy, and it's not consuming as well. I think that's incredibly important that we get fire on the landscape at an interval that is relatively regular, but it doesn't necessarily burn the same way every time. And a lot of things have an effect on that. Humidity, the temperature, solar radiation, these can all affect these things. And years when it burns patchy, we're leaving refugia behind for those insects that don't move quite as fast. So there's a little bit of space for them. And this year in particular, I've got two really great videos that'll hopefully play showing what last year's fire intensity looked like and this year's. And as those of you in here, you guys do a lot of work outside. You all know that with the wetter spring that we had in early summer, that big blue stem grew like nobody's business. And it's turning out to be a very interesting fire season because of that. But really when there's variability in fire intensity, that's replicating what it was like historically, because lightning isn't going to strike in the same place every time. The fire isn't going to burn the same way. And we want it to be random, but also safe. Okay, let's see. Fingers crossed this plays. So this looks intense right now, but I'm going to pan up the bluff and just pay attention to where the fire is going up the bluff. So I took this photo last year and you can see there's still snow on the ground. Oh, you can even hear the crackle. So up on that bluff, like really, there's not that much going on up there. It really creeped up and we had a lot of areas where it didn't fully burn, but we still got the black that we needed so that we could burn the prairie below it without a lot of issues. Okay, and this was this year. Same area, but it's just, there's 5 bluffs. This was a different one. And not only that, so you can see that we've got big blue stem. And we also had the wind in our favor. So fire really moves quickly uphill. And when you also add wind moving in that direction, it can really light off. So like you can see just how quickly those fire fronts are moving up and pulling together. You can just barely see my colleague schlepping her way through to try and get that to light. And I thought this image was really great as well. It kind of shows the logistics of how we get this to burn. This brush in the foreground, this is my 5th year burning these bluffs, and this is the first year that the brush actually burned. So because we had a lot of woody encroachment, there's some brambles in here, some sumac, some buckthorn. You can even see like it's kind of got the shrubby oak characteristics of an oak barren. We weren't really able to get fire in there. So normally we would have to have someone hike up to where the brush stopped and light. And we still had someone do that, but we were able to also light from that area and get that to burn. And we did have somebody, I took the picture, I had the hose. So there was a hose. For an instance like this, it was dry enough that we couldn't just light it without a little bit of holding. And then this photo, this was from 2 years ago, but and I had to leave early, but you could still see the operations wrapping up. And I really love this because you can see the bluff face and you can see where the trees are. And I just think it's absolutely beautiful. And if you're ever driving along Spring Green and you see the open bluff faces, and then you keep going east and all of a sudden you see mounds, and it's like, that's supposed to be a bluff. And it's just absolutely wild to me just how much things change when we take fire off of the landscape. And especially because it's only been about 150 years. Like these bluffs have been open and green and prairie for, tens to hundreds of thousands of years before this. So then we hit mid-March to early April, and that's when we're focusing on burning the prairie flats and oak barrens. Both of these photos were taken on Monday. But it's really fun to see how now we need some more logistical support. We can't just hike up there with a drip torch. We need some engines. We need to have some backup so that we can keep this all contained where it needs to be. And also you can see the prickly pear. It's just, I've been burning it for half a decade and it still blows my mind to see all those prickly pears. And I just really liked this photo showing fire running through oak barrens at one of the bluffs. Fire and barrens really are just, they have such a special relationship, and it's really cool to get to see it in person. So sometimes we do burn the bluff and the flats at the same time. The large bluff in particular, if you've been to Spring Green, that's the one with the big trail to the top. That's the one that you can see from the highway. That's the one where you can, like, you just see all of Wisconsin. I think you can even see to Iowa from up there. A lot of times, because that bluff is bigger and the woods aren't quite as dense at the top, we lose our window faster. So we were not able to burn just the bluff because the snow was gone. The other 4, we had no problems. This one, we weren't able to burn it by itself, but that's okay. We just incorporated it into our burn unit. So this is a map of our burn units. Excuse me. We burned subunit A and B, and then that big bluff isn't mapped, but that orange dotted line, that's the trail to the top. And we just had someone, because we were getting all sorts of fire at the bottom, we were able to send someone. We started at that little nubbin where the between 1 and 6. We had some people moving south, and they had ATVs and UTVs as water support, because, you know, there's an ag field and some prairie that we didn't want the fire to escape to. And while we were doing that, we had one person on the top of the bluff and one person on the bottom. And while there were some holding concerns on that north facing slope, like you can see exactly where that bluff comes to a point, because on one side is grass and on the other side is super dense forest. So someone just lit off the top of that, and it creeped down a little bit, and we had someone watch it for the rest of the day. Maybe 1 or 2 things little like caught, and they just grubbed it out. It was totally fine. And while that was happening, we had other people lighting along the bottom and tying it all together. So if we miss that window, it is still possible. It does make for a longer day, and there's definitely more logistical things that have to happen all at once, but it can still happen. So this is a great picture of what the day looked like operationally. Again, this was on Monday. I'm so glad that I got to burn before giving this presentation, because I got some really, really great photos. But you can see we had someone along the ridgetop lighting, and then someone mid-slope. Well, they were more closer to the top than mid-slope, but that's okay, lighting. And you can see just a teeny bit of fire off in the distance. And while we had someone on the prairie lighting, so you can see the 2 different things happening at once. And it almost feels like 2 different burns until it comes together at the end. So I took 4 pictures throughout the day as we were burning. The first one's the day of, before we burned it, nice and dry and crispy. And then during operations, and like I pointed out in the last slide, you can see that that small black line on the top of the ridge, that's someone else lighting. And then when it pulls together, as the fire grows, the fire fronts feed in intensity, and they build off of each other, and it builds and builds, and there's more and more energy until it comes together. You can see where it came together. It really was very smoky. You can see some really tall flame lengths. And then this was immediately after. This was right at the end of the day before we were going home. Nice and black. You can see some prickly pear. I'd give it 2 weeks and you're going to see lots and lots of green. Here's another video just for fun. And this one is really interesting. This is our smallest bluff, and it's tucked in the back. And this one has the most stark difference between the woodlands that surround it and the prairie. And it's kind of like a mini, like we've got the big bluff with the trail. This is like a mini version of that, because it has like a mini prairie, and then it goes up and it has the bluff. So we kind of did something similar where we burned the bluff, and then 20 minutes later, we went and we lit off the prairie, which this is another video of that. So we already had nice black on top, and so we were able to just light off the prairie. And you can see there's still snow scattered amongst the big blue stem. And once it hits that snow, well, even if it was snow yesterday and today it's just damp soil, like it is not going to cross that. So yeah, just another video. So then when we get to late April and early May, we hit those north facing slopes, which I have not really touched on those. I really wanted to talk more about the fire dynamics of these sandier ecosystems. It is like night and day. It is 2 totally different plant communities. You could be in it could be like you're in 2 totally different parts of the state when you make it to the top of the bluff and you look one way and you look the other. If you guys are familiar with the Baraboo Hills, those oak maple forests, that's a lot like what this is on this other side. There's the soil composition is different. The sunlight is different. Even the radiant heat you get from that sunlight is not as strong as the south facing slope. That's what makes these bluffs so unique. If these bluffs were not south north facing, but east west, the contrast would not be nearly as stark. And because it's north facing, and there's a lot more woodlands, it takes a lot longer for these units to dry out so we can burn them in the fall. And these kind of have a sweet spot. It's like just as when the soil, or not the soil, excuse me, just when the leaf litter is drying up enough to burn it, that's when things are just starting to leaf out. And if you wait too long and too much stuff leaves out, then you get canopy cover, and you don't get enough drying on the soil, and you can't burn those units. And so without fire, there's a term called mesification, and that's just where the whole ecosystem becomes wetter. A lot more maples, buckthorn, shrubs encroach, and it becomes harder and harder to burn as it gets wetter and wetter. And then I also threw in some wildflower pictures of the day we burned this. And it's hard to see, but this is incredibly steep. It doesn't really look like it, but it's steep on the other side too. So I think that these three photos really tell quite a story. You've got right around the time TNC acquired this land, covered in cedar trees, some of the things we do to manage it, and now what it's at now. So I've been fortunate to inherit working on this preserve in its maintenance phase. A lot of the heavy lifting that was done, removing all of those cedars, dealing with all that black locust. There's still some, but it's nowhere near as bad as that photo. That's already been taken care of. And so the work that we're doing is just maintaining the restoration and the quality of this site. I did not formally get permissions to share this photo. That's why it's just a screenshot from Instagram, but he did tag TNC Wisconsin. This is one of our neighbors, and this is his backyard, which is pretty incredible. But the fire behavior is so astounding from a distance that you can see it. And I just wanted to include this photo because it's like, for me, it is a beautiful time of year when you're driving down the highway and you see smoke plumes like this, because it's just like, everybody's out burning. Everybody's taking advantage of this beautiful day. So if anybody is interested in learning more about prescribed fire, I do have a few references here. There's quite a few of you in this room that already burn, so you can kind of zone out if you want. But I'm going to talk just a little bit about what training looks like, how to volunteer, and just a smidgen of private landowner resources. That's not really my wheelhouse, but I know there's a lot of people that own land, that own a prairie, and want to be able to burn it. So I'm just going to give just a little bit on how to do that. So a lot of organizations require an NWCG training, which is the National Wildfire Coordinating Group. Smaller nonprofits don't normally, they have something similar. You have to take some sort of formalized training in order to burn, not necessarily NWCG, but something similar. The Nature Conservancy, we do require that, mostly because a lot of the work that I do, I work with the federal government, and this was established by the federal government. But some organizations, like I know the Prairie Enthusiasts, they have a super similar training. So like if you did this online coursework, you'd be able to volunteer anywhere, as opposed to like the Prairie Enthusiast training, you could only volunteer with the Prairie Enthusiasts. But there's online coursework. This is the list of the online courses that you take. They're self-paced, they're on the computer, they take a couple of days. And then you have a field day where you figure out how to work a drip torch and what hand tools work like. And then there's also a work capacity test. Again, most organizations do not require this. Unfortunately, TNC does. Because of that, a lot of the good volunteers volunteer elsewhere. And I understand, because the pack test is not fun. You have to walk 2 miles with 25 pounds in under a half hour, which there's a lot of people, that's easier than it sounds. It sounds pretty rough, but it's definitely doable. So if you wanted to volunteer with literally anybody else, yes? That is the arduous pack test. Just to volunteer, you have to do the moderate. So it's a little bit, not nearly as intense. But if you wanted to volunteer with anybody else besides us, you don't have to take a pack test. So not really selling TNC right now. But Madison Area Technical College and Fox Valley Technical College, they both offer courses that you can take in person. They're usually over a weekend. You don't have to be a student to take them. I just helped direct a few volunteers in that direction. They took the course 3 weeks ago, and they went and burned with the Prairie Enthusiasts just yesterday, which was really great. The Wisconsin Prescribed Fire Council, oh, I forgot to mention, I'm on the committee, or I'm on a committee with the Wisconsin Prescribed Fire Council, so I'm very heavily involved with that organization. They have great resources, whether you're wanting to learn more about burning, what it looks like burning on your own land, how to volunteer, as well as the Fire Learning Network. They have a lot of really great resources as well. And I also forgot to put on here, but UW-Stevens Point, they have a whole, their prescribed fire program for students is absolutely phenomenal, but they also have a lecture series that goes on about prescribed fire in different ecosystems and how it's used for management in other ways as well. There's so many places that you can volunteer to burn. And all of them except TNC, you don't have to do a pack test. So easy. It just makes me so happy to see all the different organizations that you can get fire on the ground. And this is a list, if you are interested in contacting anybody, this list I pulled directly from prescribedfire.org. That is the Wisconsin Prescribed Fire Council. So many great contacts so that you can get involved and get fire. And if you're thinking like, I'm 70, I'm too old for this, absolutely not. Absolutely not. A lot of times when you're burning prairie, you're sitting on a UTV all day. Like it can be physical, but there's also a lot of times where it's pretty doable. Our burn boss is 74 and he walks a hell of a lot faster than I do. And then just really quickly, again, private landowner, prescribed firework is not necessarily my wheelhouse, but for anybody that does own their own prairie, they want to do some burning. These are some really phenomenal resources. Again, I'm going to push the Wisconsin Prescribed Fire Council. They've got a lot of great resources. If you own land, but you don't want to burn it yourself, they have a whole list of contractors that you can use. They have a really great basic primer document on what types of basic tools you need and what a burn plan looks like. And they also have all of the training and volunteer opportunities that I mentioned. The Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, it's through the USDA. And it's just a cost share incentive to help landowners restore their environmentally sensitive acreage to native vegetation. So they've got some burning incentives in there as well. And then the Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They also have a similar program that provides incentives and learning for landowners who want to do prescribed fire on their own lands. So some really great resources, whether you own land and you want to burn it, whether you want to dip your toes into burning and do some legal arson. It's really a fun time. And then this photo, I got to watch the sunrise from the big bluff because I was making sure that the line of fire we lit right at the top hadn't crept overnight. So I woke up and I walked up there and nothing was smoldering, but I got to admire the 200 acres that we burned and watch the sunrise. And it was pretty spectacular. So does anyone have any questions?
I just have a comment. It was raised in Spring Green and our house faced the bluffs.
Really?
So
Yeah.
I could see.
Yeah, you were watching this happen in your own backyard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's really.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
I spent a lot of time on that western section that is invasive property. And that field of that was one of the most unusual things I've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We've got some new staff that just joined, and one of them is from Florida, and we've neglected to tell him about the cactus. And so we're burning it, and he's like, wait a minute, this can't be right. And I'm like, nope, that's right. I forgot to tell you, there's cactus here. So, yeah. Yeah. There's one other unit that's owned by the DNR. It's not necessarily Quincy Bluff in the Central Sands, but it's managed by the Quincy Bluff team. And there's actually 2 species of cactus in Wisconsin. There's prickly pear and there's, I think it's called barrel prickly pear. It's much smaller. And they're both, the barrel prickly pear is a lot rarer. I don't know if it's threatened or critically imperiled. I don't know off the top of my head. The first time I saw it was last year, and they're like, oh yeah, watch out. The way it propagates is you step on it and it goes with you. And they discovered it because they were mowing a burn break. And all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, there's all these cactus in the middle of our burn break now, because when they chopped it up, it was just propagating it more. So, yeah. I do not. Hi, Graham. Nice to meet you. Sure.
How does fire affect light? Reduce it.
Ooh, I would say that it does not necessarily reduce the blight. I have not seen too much oak blight on our preserves, but I will talk about spongy moth because it does something super similar where it defoliates the trees. And when it defoliates those trees, you no longer have fuel on the ground. So then it becomes increasingly more difficult to burn that site. Because that oak leaf litter, like next fall, go for a hike, pick up an oak leaf on the ground and pick up a maple leaf. And the oak leaf is all curly and crispy and the maple leaf is flat as a pancake. The maple leaf is the one that you slip on when you try to go for a hike in the rain. Without those oak leaves, without that crispy light fuel, it's harder and harder to burn. And these trees have been defoliated, they're dying. So then it becomes a wetter and wetter ecosystem as those oak leaves or as those oak trees encroach. So what I can say is, fortunately, fire does not do much to help with oak blight. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, Graham. You know what? I am embarrassed to say I do not know a whole bunch. I can say that TNC has been doing a lot of great work with Ho-Chunk. We've gotten some grants in the past. And instead of trying to work with the Ho-Chunk, we've been just giving that money to them outright because we know that they're doing good work for the land and we don't necessarily need to be standing there next to them. And we have a new program that's starting in the northern part of the state, and a huge focus of that is working with Indigenous partners. So while I can't attest to how much we do the history of the Ho-Chunk in this area, unfortunately, I can say that we are getting better and we are doing more to have Indigenous involvement in this work.
I guess I just wanted to point out
Yeah.
that most prairies
Without, that's true. And I did mention that very briefly. I've sped over it. But yeah, a lot of the fire on the landscape, whether it was natural or Native American caused, and let's be honest, like lightning does not strike all that often. So it was a huge tool. Yeah, for that. Yeah.
To think that spring green are special for the people. One of them, when you see it in photos, you have the continuity between the expensive flats
Mhm.
and the bluff. And there aren't many places. It's
Mhm.
pretty, it's so large. Now think of Badger. It's a very similar situation when you have the south bluff of the Baraboo Hills, on the east-west, with the extensive Baraboo base. So, when we were all talking many years ago about why Badger is so important, one of the reasons was that you had continuity between the river, the flat prairie, and the bluffs.
Mhm.
So even though the geology is completely different, the first Baraboo Hills still have that opportunity to use fire to open up the south bluff of the Baraboo Hills, just as you're opening up the south base of the bluff
Mhm.
that's very green. And it so happens that the Ho-Chunk own a good portion of that area that's the south base of the Baraboo that. So, so even though they haven't been as in, the mission hasn't been as involved down here, they are in the prime spot, and they've already begun doing this. Starting to see like the north edge of Walking Chunk, we open bluff forest. So we can do a great joint field trip by looking here and then 20 miles up the road and going back.
Yeah. And I think I'm not 100% certain for this, but I know that some of the grant money that we received that we awarded to Ho-Chunk did go to some of the work that they were doing at Badger. So
It also said these are a couple areas where these are large burdens for Wisconsin.
yeah, we didn't burn the whole thing plus the bluff, but it was the first time that we did all three chunks. I had like subunit A, B, and C. This was the first year that we did 2 of the 3. And next year we're gonna do them all. And maybe even the bluff. We find it easier and safer to burn the bluff off if we can first. But if we can do it all, that's like 300 acres. That's pretty big for Wisconsin.
So that's similar. This is more of spring.
Yes.
So I really enjoyed your talk because it's obviously you're really. And you know a lot about it.
Thank you.
Really natural way of presenting. When I was promoting your talk, I had a naysay on social media saying something to the effect that an affinity number You know, there was just so much toxins in the air. So
Mhm.
what do you say to people like this? Because we get excited about some tourists
Yes.
sky this time of year.
Other people do not. Yep. Yes.
We are in the 7 pounds, which if you've never been in, we see orange.
Yes.
Big,
Yes.
big smoke. What do you say to people who are, I guess, really, speculative or, skeptical?
Yeah, oh, for sure. We get pushback all the time. We have to notify all of the neighboring landowners, and anybody that could be affected by the smoke beforehand. Sometimes the day of, and sometimes we're knocking on doors, like we'll give them a call a few days before we don't hear from them and we want to make sure they know. And a lot of times they're like, yeah, I'm really excited for that smoke. I've worked at Military Ridge, which is our prairie. And Military Ridge is off of a very busy highway, and also it has a lot of very busy county roads, and it's super hilly, so it's hard to see. And we legally cannot stop traffic, but we still put someone standing there with a slow sign. And I have been the unlucky person to be that, to be standing there. And I've had people pull up to me and they came out of their way. They followed the smoke plume to tell me how much they dislike what we're doing. What I usually respond to is that there's different levels of combustion. When you do prescribed fire, you usually get more complete combustion. And when that happens, there's less particulate matter in the smoke that you're inhaling, less of the PM 2.5 that everybody worries about, that they're really worried about in California, versus when it's burning in a wildfire, it's not burning in like the ideal conditions. And that's when you get really, really black smoke. Like that picture that, here, I think I can go back. Because when you burn the bluffs and the energy pulls together, you are going to get a little bit of black smoke. And the reason that is because, you know, on the middle of the slope where we can't get to, where the smoke's or the fire's coming up this way and coming down, like it is burning very quickly and very hot. And so you're not necessarily getting complete combustion. So there is some particulate matter in there. However, because this is a prairie and barrens ecosystem, that smoke lifts up and it's gone later on. One thing that we do to mitigate that, we were burning at our Meyer Preserve in Mugwanago. That was yesterday. And one thing that we did was not only burning around the edges, but we did some interior ignition as well, because that slows the fire intensity and it allows the fire to move slower and combust fully. So that's one thing that we like to talk about, where it's like, if we're not burning it right now and you're getting a little bit of smoke that's a little bit bad for you, then if there's a wildfire, you're going to get a lot of smoke that's really bad. And odds are it's going to also consume buildings, and that's got a whole bunch of crap you don't want to inhale. Yeah. In Spring Green or Military Ridge?
Spring.
Little to the west.
Like, yeah.
Here, wait, I'm gonna pull up a map so you can show me. I'm gonna pull up the map. Because I know that we're just starting to do there's some remnant prairie that we have that we're just starting to, we're writing the burn plan. As we speak, it's getting submitted. So let's see here. I'm gonna zoom in. Oh. No.
Air photo, I would guess like.
Unfortunately, so I was talking about the little gap in the green right here. There's like a little bowl of remnant prairie. Since we don't own anything over there, I don't think we have been doing any work. If we knew who the landowner was, that might change things. Because if there's private landowners that are adjacent to our preserve and they're okay with it, we will help them burn their property, because it helps us make a bigger burn unit. It usually makes things easier for us in terms of holding. But yeah, I don't know very much about that. Anyone else? Sure. Yes, we were, yeah. Mhm. Sometimes, we usually use a combination of kind of, the wait and see method isn't quite what I want to say, but we wait a little bit to see what's coming up, but we do also incorporate some native seed mixes. So yeah, it's a little bit of both, I guess, is my answer to your question. Yeah. Do you
Yeah,
wanna-
just last question, with all those, listed species that are endangered, does that make it quite a bit more difficult, or do you need to?
Yes, so that is another fun caveat in terms of timing that I did not mention. So, we do have quite a few threatened and endangered reptiles. And the way that we mitigate for that is once the soil temperature hits a certain amount, because you know, the air temperature this time of year, it's gonna be 25 at night and then 70 during the day. And the air temperature doesn't change, or the ground temperature doesn't change quite as quickly. So we have a threshold. Once the ground temperature hits a certain amount, we know that a lot of those hibernating reptiles are starting to come up, then we don't burn. Our Page Creek Preserve, which is in the Central Sands, it's in Marquette County, it's near Packwaukee. We have slender glass lizards there, which is really awesome. Not for our burn boss. It's a pain in the butt for him because it's a combination of prairie and woodland. And so usually about the time when it's dry enough to burn the woodland part, we can no longer burn the prairie because the slender glass lizards have come up. So he's always cursing out the lizards. I think they're great, and I think there's ways we can mitigate that. But he's always, unfortunately, it's like the dang lizards. So yeah, that's usually our stopgap for that. Yes.
Washington, yeah, probably Washington was all, I think you, having, you know.
So for us, we, for the most part, are safe. The fact that we work for a nonprofit really helps. We have a few things with grants that we're still waiting to see. The biggest struggle for us is our federal partners. They need us more than ever. So I get sent out to partner with Forest Service employees. I got to do some really cool research at the Bridger Teton National Forest in the right adjacent to Grand Teton National Park. It was absolutely beautiful. And a few of the women that work in that project, because they're researchers, they're not wildland firefighters. They still go out and fight wildland fires when they get called out. They no longer get to do that research and collect that valuable data about just exactly how much the fire is needed in that area. Fortunately for us, like funding is still good, and we know that these partners need us more than ever. So we're hoping that that's going to allow us to help them. We have a new fire program that's starting up in the Northwoods. We don't have a ton of land that's fire dependent up in the Northwoods, but a lot of our partners do. The Shigwamigan and Nicolet National Forest, some DNR entities, as well as a lot of indigenous land needs fire up there. And we're very curious to see what happens. Because a huge component of this program is facilitating partnerships with the Forest Service. So they're either going to really, really need us to take space for a lot of the employees that have unfortunately left, or their whole program is just going to not be able to move forward at all. So we're really hoping that we can step in where they're not going to be able to move forward. So we'll see what's going to happen. Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Karina. I think maybe this was a rescheduled lecture. I think we were gonna go earlier at one time, and thanks for coming in like the busiest time of your burning site.
Very healthy. Only like 2 burns here or there, but
Well, I took the dog for a run down in Walking Iron in Mazo, and there were prescribed burn signs all over down Highway Y. And then you could see some gray smoke just about every direction. So I knew it was a busy day for that. So thanks for coming. And we have one left. We only have one left in our series for this round. And that will be a month from now. That's on April 10. And so I have a question for you. Name the book. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. The Tale of Two Cities. It was the spring of hope and the winter of despair. And Dickens wrote that about the French Revolution. Well, every time there's war, right, you see the best of human values rise, and you see the worst. And a lot of times as a nation, I think we try to fan the flames of the best and try to forget about the worst. And so I think next month is going to be a really good lecture because we're going to be hearing about, we hear about all the heroism and the sacrifice to defeat the Axis powers in World War II, and that's true. But there was also the other side of the coin, which was it exposed deep racial prejudice that in some ways we still have. And two Mikes, Michael Goff, he's kind of one of our board members emeritus, and writes our newsletter for our organization, Badger History Group. He initially it was just going to be him, but he invited Michael Jacobs, Professor Michael Jacobs from Platteville. Is that correct? And he's kind of the expert on the KKK in Wisconsin. And he's going to come and partner with Michael Gock next month to talk about racism in the defense industry. And with a special focus, I assume, on the Badger plant. So come on out again next month and hear maybe some more of the uncomfortable aspects of the United States war efforts, especially at Badger. So we hope to see you either here or on Zoom, and that will finish up this series, and we'll get to work on maybe next year's series pretty soon. So thanks for coming.